Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we complete 5 of 5 sessions on strategies of resistance in a time of Trump. I want to frame our discussion today, which will focus on nature in a time of Trump, in the following way by referring to a book that was published in Germany. I believe it was in 1947. It was called Hostages to Civilization. And the book talked about how the German and eventually European Jews were hostages to German civilization. It was written by a German Jew whose name escapes me at the moment. But it was a very, very powerful book by a woman who understood that deeper than the fascist overthrow of the German democratic institutions in the 1930s, there was something much more fundamental going on. And I think that's important in understanding Donald Trump. He's been referred to as a fascist. Elon Musk, during the January 20th rally at the RFK Stadium, gave what appeared to many to be a Sieg Heil salute. And we think of Trump often as a fascist, but I don't believe that's strictly true. Certainly not in the classical sense of that term. You know, the rise of Hitler and the rise of Mussolini, which were the two explicitly fascistic regimes in Europe in the 1930s and 1940s, till both were overthrown during the Second World War, were parts of a interplay between a militant left, the communists, the socialists, and the militant rights, with prevailing political elites who were so afraid of the left, the socialists, the communists, that they made a pact with the right and allowed the right to come in and take over the government to squelch the left. That was what, in the 1930s, it meant to be a fascist. You were there to destroy communism and socialism in Europe, and you were backed by the prevailing capital class that kind of held their noses at what you were doing in terms of your excesses, but had brought you in precisely to destroy the left. That's not true in America, because there is no left in America. Both political parties are essentially the same. The institutions don't need to be overthrown because they're already oriented to the political power in the Oval Office and in the military-industrial complex. Trump doesn't need to overthrow the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has already voted, before Trump even came into office, that the president, while president, is completely immune to any act he commits in his official capacity. I don't think there's another country, maybe in the world, that says that. Most go through the pretense. And this is what I want to dwell on. That hypocrisy is the compliment that vice pays to virtue. Hypocrisy is the compliment that vice pays to virtue. During ordinary times, most of us act hypocritically. For social convention, we may not agree with something, but we act politely. And what Trump is essentially doing is stripping away the veneer of our civilization to show us the shadow content, and is doing away with hypocrisy and explicitly letting people know what he intends to do. Because there's no real countervailing force in either the polity or the civic institutions to stop him from revealing what he most sincerely believes and seeks to achieve. And this is where the notion in the book, Hostages of Civilization, comes in. It talks about the fact that toward the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, Germany was considered to be the most civilized nation in Europe, in the world. Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge were considered good, but it was the German universities that were considered the best. Oftentimes people would study at Harvard and then go over to Germany for their PhD. It was the most scientific, the most technical, the most rational, the most philosophical, and the wealthiest and most capacious country on earth. And what happened with Adolf Hitler is that veneer of civility was stripped away, and the shadow content of the German shadow side was allowed to spill into the public domain without hypocrisy, without pretending it was anything different than what it really was. That's what's happening with Trump, in my opinion. He's not a fascist. He's a tyrant who has emerged in some ways sui generis. He's unlike any personality we've had in the history of the United States. A larger than life figure that is feeding off of grievances and parlayed and trim-tabbed over the grievances of a land that was getting increasingly disparate in terms of wealth, race, opportunity. All those grievances fed him and made him unstoppable. Because, as I said yesterday, democracy in America was breaking down into polarized, dysfunctional mob rule. That generates a lot of grievances between left and right, north and south, east and west, even rich and poor. Grievances build up when your prevailing institutions no longer serve the purpose for which they're intended, and that is the amelioration of conflict, the solving of problems. The United States hasn't solved a major problem in maybe 50 or 60 years. None of our global issues are being solved either for decades. So the system is building up. The stresses are building up. And a guy like Trump can intuit that with almost like an animal instinct and speak to it. And the more crude, the more bombastic, the more racist, the more sexist, the more it feeds it and the more powerful he becomes till finally he reaches into the Oval Office and he does what he's been telling people he's going to do the whole time, and that is to strip the veneer off of the civilization and allow everything to just spill out. So today, the White House press secretary on social media said this is going to be the biggest mass deportation in history. And it started last night with 500 people. But more is coming. No apology. No need for hypocrisy. Because vice no longer feels the need to compliment virtue by seeming virtuous, because vice itself has become virtue. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Humanity Rising. We'll be revisiting these themes in the future because this is going to be a time that is going to try the souls of us all. And we need to build up the resilience and the caring and the understanding that women, the vulnerable, our earth, all of it needs the tender, loving care that we can provide in a time of vice. It's my pleasure now to welcome Tom Eddington to convene this program. Tom has been the convener for this whole 5 days. And so, Tom, thank you so much. And I turn the program over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thank you, as always, for your opening comments. As Jim mentioned, and as we build, today is focused on the environment. One of the 4 targets that the Trump administration has identified. I'll just share a couple of comments before we invite our panelists into today's program. So what we're witnessing is an agenda of the Trump administration that he has made abundantly clear he will do everything he can to succeed at his agenda. And he's getting some opposition, both opposition from the financial markets and opposition from philanthropy. And what I find interesting is that, on one hand, Trump has withdrawn the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord, putting us in company with Iran, Libya, and Yemen as the only countries that have not agreed to the global deal. And at the same time, the Davos and the leaders there have focused on climate change for a number of years, identifying climate change as one of the greatest threats to humanity. They've bended to Trump and have identified misinformation as the biggest threat to humanity and disinformation, and have backed off of their identification and commitment to climate change. Meanwhile, we have countries like China that have ensured that they will become an exemplar of a green economy and have not backed off from their commitments at all around climate change. They have acknowledged that climate change is the common challenge facing all of mankind. We have leaders in the European Union and Germany and other select countries around the world who've identified that they will continue and the market forces will continue to move to renewable energy. And so we've got a fierce battle underway. Michael Bloomberg has stepped forward with his Bloomberg philanthropy to support the US commitment to the Paris Climate Accords. So we have a fierce battle underway between Trump and his commitment to drill, baby, drill, and the economics of solar and wind and geothermal and other alternative energy sources that financially are cheaper than fossil fuel. And so we will witness and we'll watch what happens over the next 4 years. And who's going to win that fight? Humanity or the Trump administration? And so with those opening comments, I'd like to invite B. Fulkerson to join us on screen. B is joining us from Third Act, and delighted to have you with us today, B.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And we've framed this week as strategic resistance. So I'd love to jump into the conversation around what are some strategies and what are some things that we can be doing to support the philanthropy and the markets as individual citizens to ensure that that humanity does continue to survive.
Well, so Third Act's mission is not to support the markets or philanthropy. So you're asking the wrong person about that question. I'm not sure what the hell we can do about that. I think philanthropy needs to be organized a hell of a lot better. And I'm down here in Las Vegas right now at a conference called Creating Change. It's the largest gathering of queer people probably in the world. There's like 3,000 of us here. And there was a panel yesterday on funding the trans community. And it's like less than 4% of, 4 cents out of every $100 goes there. And some of the best ideas for getting us out of this mess we're in are coming from people on the margins. Creativity has always come from those on the margins. You can't get much more marginalized than a Black trans woman. And so I think we need to listen to those voices because, there's something that's yearning here to emerge in our world. And, and it's full of possibility right now. One of the other things here was the surviving a possible fascist future. And that word possible, it's not written yet. And I agree with what Jim said. Trump is not a fascist. If Trump were a fascist, we wouldn't be here. If fascism would be here, we're here. Because a lot of people on the left might say, oh, we're in a fascist, blah, blah, blah. And it's, well, you know what? You wouldn't be able to say that if we were really, So, but, the other possibility is a multiracial, true democracy, getting away from the duopoly too that Jim talked about. And, it just depends on how the heck we all show up right now. It really depends on that. We have the chance right now in our lives that are left. And that's why working with people over 60, which I do at Third Act, is just such a inspiring time, because the actions that we take in these last remaining years and decades of our lives are going to influence the history of this planet for the next 100 generations in terms of whether or not our grandkids have a shot at a livable planet or a stable democracy. Anyway, sorry to ramble on your great question, and I probably completely deflected it.
No rambling, and no problem. I'd love to hear some of the ideas and some of the creativity that's emerging from the conference you're attending.
Well, One of them, so Trump's going to be here tomorrow in Las Vegas, right down the street. And it's really tempting, for me, because like in that first Trump administration, you know, I started getting arrested again, and I started like going out there yelling at buildings, being really angry, leaning into like uh just the real self-righteousness, um and now there seems to be more of a mood for deliberation to make sure that the action, because we've got to like sustain ourselves for these next 4 years too. And we've got to come from a place of deliberation so that we know the actions that we do take will be effective. And we've also got to build our infrastructure. We've got to build our organizing muscle. We've got to build our connective tissue with one another and these relationships that are foundational to movement building. And um, and so they're really, the conference organizers, spoke last night about how let's not all go down there and yell at Trump. As tempting as that is, oh my God, I'm really tempted to go down there and get arrested again. But the idea is we're not going to let them take us off of our focus. We're not going to live, and part of it is that's the story he wants to tell. He wants to tell the story if he does one thing and he knows exactly how we're going to react. We should not play that game anymore. That's some of the things that are coming out. Again, this idea of possibility and how authoritarians are about shutting down possibilities and moving back to that nostalgic false past where everything was sunny and bright, versus these dark times if you don't give me my way kind of thing. And the other thing that's coming out a lot is the idea of joy, and this is not a caravan of despair. In resistance, I think, Michelle Alexander wrote, I think, one of the best essays about the resistance. And she said, we are not the resistance. Resistance is the dam that holds back the water. We are the water, and we can be incredibly powerful together. And there's some, and to embrace that fluidity, embrace that joy that comes from being in solidarity and in comradeship with people who also know that a different world is possible, and to really take care of each other, really like get each other's backs, really cuddle each other, and know that your courage is giving me courage, and that we are truly in this thing together.
That's fantastic that you bring that up. Yesterday's panelist, Jody Evans from Code Pink, also brought joy into the conversation and shared with our audience that's where she's living her life from, and that's what she stands for, and that's the invitation for all of us to be living from a place of joy.
Yeah, yeah, and like right after Trump, right after Trump got elected, I went up into the mountains for 4 days. I live up in Washoe Paiute Shoshone land up in Reno, about 470 miles away from here, and we're right on the edge of the Great Basin Desert and the Sierra Nevada. To me, it's probably the most beautiful place in the world. I love it, and but I get my joy from being out there in the desert and in the mountains with people that I love, and then a lot of times by myself. And so people have to find what gives them that kind of joy and that kind of sustenance that speaks to their heart, and that will then, for me, motivate me to be my best self, motivate me to show up as fully as I can in a sober, eyes wide open, kind of way. Not that we're gonna, and letting go of these outcomes too, and that the idea of working in relationship with other people in joyful community is the work. Not necessarily that's going to lead this or that way, because a lot of times, well, for me anyway, I think those outcomes are up to some greater forces than me. And but that work of finding joy in community with others, wherever it gets, like I just started volunteering for a mutual aid organization in Reno, and I always used to think that mutual aid, because I've run environmental and social justice groups in Nevada for Geezer Alert 35 years. And our thing was about, you got to change the fundamental conditions. You've got to change public policy. You've got to change, that if we don't like increase wages, then those lines at the food bank and the homeless shelters are always going to be coming out the door, and if we don't increase opportunities for housing, so why are you wasting your time providing those direct services, and I'm realizing that, that in my volunteer work now, working directly with people who are impacted, people without homes, and those that provide, other volunteers that are in these mutual aid associations, it's really given me a completely different outlook on things. And it's just great to be able to learn new things. I'm going to be 65 this year, and it's so great to be able to learn new things at this age. So yeah.
I want to pick up on your comment about where you live and the extraordinary beauty that represents. And not to take us down a rabbit hole too much, but what we've seen with President Trump, not just in the last 3 or 4 days, but certainly over the last 10 years, is that he is abundantly clear that he is all about control. He's consumed by power. And when I've seen images of him on television, if he's in quote unquote nature, it's on a golf course where humanity has imposed its power, its control over nature. Curious, and as I said, I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole, but for any of us who've spent time in nature, in its broadest sense, and we are nature, we are part of nature, as opposed to having domination over nature. If you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah. First, the golf courses, nature, and open space thing. It reminds me here in Las Vegas, this town that I have a love-hate relationship with. Love it because you have to love the places where you organize, and also because my grandkids live here. And then dislike it because it's so extractive of human beings, and because they were also going to steal all the water from rural Nevada and pipe it down here for their golf courses and for their fountains and for their excess, and until we organized and we stopped them. One of the biggest environmental battles in this country. Anyway, so about 30 years ago, the developers from Las Vegas came to the legislature because we had a requirement for open space, and for parks and open space, and they were able to get a bill passed that designates golf courses as open space. So yeah, things are so mechanized and so getting so industrialized, and people are retreating so much to screens and to their phones. And there's just such a sense of isolation, which can lead to all kinds of things. For me, it led to addiction, and I learned that being out, from a really early age, that being out, and smelling the cedar trees, smelling the ponderosa, the Jeffrey pine. We have a sagebrush ocean here in Nevada, and sagebrush is it's a sacred plant to the native folks here, but most of the settlers, it's a weed, and we've lost 40% of that sagebrush in Nevada in the last 40 years. And the idea is that basically it can be really nurturing and healing to people. And the more we can get, and I try to get my grandkids out. I mean, there's some beautiful hiking places down here in Southern Nevada. There's some gorgeous, and I never thought, I love this Mojave Desert down here. I haven't spent a lot of time, but until they move down here, and we take them out there whenever we can, and love it. Kids, they go back to their natural element. They remember, it's in their unconscious from way back. Oh, wow, rocks. I get to climb these rocks, and it just fills my heart to see them doing that and getting off those damn screens, because to me, it's anyway, but I'm just rambling here, Tom. Sorry about that.
No apologies necessary. So I'd like to take the conversation back to, for our audience. What are some strategies? What are some things that each of us can be doing in our daily lives, in our communities, to ensure that we continue to have the environment, nature that we all love?
Thanks, Tom. I feel that's a real slow pitch. I should be able to knock this thing out of the park. But I might miss here, or at least get a foul ball. I'll do my best, but I can't do any better than quote Bill McKibben. And, his answer to that is the first thing is stop being an individual, and to join with other organizations and to work in community with others. That there's so much, so much better strength in organized numbers than individuals going out there. And, that's been the scourge of social media, and I came up as an organizer before computers, before phones, before Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all this stuff. And there's a lot of confusion with doing something like this. Oh gosh, okay, there, I'm done. There's a lot of confusion of that with real organizing and really doing some really effective stuff. I think the thing is, too, is find what brings you the most joy. Find what gives you the sense that you belong there and that this is giving you meaning. Not everybody wants to march. Not everybody wants to go get arrested. Not everybody wants to be out in the streets. And that's fine. There's people who need to make the sandwiches. There's people who need to make the phone calls, who need to knock on the doors, who need to give money to sustain these things. I think in this country now, because of the Congress being captured, because of the banks not, we had a big fossil-free finance campaign at Third Act where we were, and we worked on one of the biggest mass direct actions in the history of Wall Street last summer, and to going after Citibank to, because they are investing in a fossil fuel future going, a century, 50 years from now. And we are not emphasizing that as much because these banks are going to be protected under this administration. But we do have opportunities at the state and local level. And so in New York, they just passed an amazing polluters pay bill. So for Hurricane Sandy, for other future climate disasters that happen, their attorney general gets to go after the fossil fuel corporations that had a hand in making it a hell of a lot worse. It's taken after Vermont. Vermont God bless the state of Vermont, was the first one that did it. Vermont has like, I think, one or two attorneys, but New York has dozens of them. So they're really going to be able to do that. Now, other states are considering that polluters pay. The other thing is like looking at these public utilities commissions in the United States, they have an outsized influence on the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And again, as Bill says, they've been protected and insulated by their own boredom. And it's true. But we have a huge opportunity to influence those public utilities commissions. And Trump is not going to be able to roll back a lot of the big IRA things. They're still going to be going through the states. And I know in Nevada, we've got a Republican governor. He, who was like a Trumper, but even he applied for all of the funds and, wants to move that through Nevada. And now it's our job to influence our legislature and our PUC to make sure that they are spent correctly and they go to actually renewable programs. So, I think joining organizations, looking at state and local initiatives as opposed to like national campaigns, leaning into joy, making connections with people. Final thing I'll say on this is that, we talk about protecting democracy. And I think that we can practice that in the way that we show up at these organizations. I mean, I work with a lot of boomers. I'm a boomer, 1960, the tail end, but we like to come in there and run the show. And, there was luckily, come in there, say, oh, that's not the way I do it. I'm out of here. Oh, you're doing it wrong. We should do it this way. What if we were to let go of that constant need to critique and to judge every organization we started being, interested in, and we just kind of like leaned into the things and doing the things that we thought were effective within that organization, So just showing up differently and might, for some of us, might be a good thing. There's a lot of anger out there, and it's really not doing us much good. It's raising our adrenaline and cortisol levels, and I'm gonna FS up, and all that, which was me until just a couple of years ago. And it's, I think now we've just got to, again, like kind of step back a little bit, take some breaths, and build a much more wide, massive movement that's going to carry us on. Last thing I'm going to say, I might have said this before, was these midterms are coming up they're coming up in 2 years. We've got opportunities to take back the House, not sure about the Senate, and some governorships. But we've got a chance to really emasculate this administration's power to govern. So we've all got to get involved in those midterms, and if that, and we got to do a much better, yeah. Anyway, so just that.
When you look back over the last 35 years and the different tactics that you've deployed, and you think about, this current administration, are there one or two or three that you would say will have the most impact or the most leverage?
Love that question. The first thing that comes to me is this is a game of addition. This is about coalition building. This is about broad-based movement building. This is not a time to say, oh, they're with the business community, they're capitalists, they're bad, we're not going to work with them. This is a time to cast a really wide net and to engage people that we might not have talked to before. It's a time to build broad coalitions and to really challenge our thinking about, oh, they did this, so I'm not going to let them in. think the biggest battles that I've been a part of, the biggest wins I've been a part of, from when I cut my teeth on fighting the MX missile here in the in the early 80s, late 70s. It was a giant nuclear weapons system that was going to take up 5 million acres of the Great Basin, and a big land, to replace some of the ICBMs in other Western states. And then after that, the fight against Yucca Mountain, which is a place to dump the nation's nuclear waste on Western Shoshone land here in southern Nevada, to stop nuclear weapons testing. And then this latest one is on the Las Vegas water grab, which would have turned, most of central Nevada into an Owens Valley, which is where Los Angeles got their water, and which is the largest source of fugitive dust in the lower 48. All that was because of broad-based coalition building. And I think that that is like that's like the dental floss. I mean, that'll really keep things healthy. It's a simple thing to do. People forget about it all the time. And but that's what I would really lean into.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because when we look at all of the full analysis of the election from November isn't complete. We won't have all the information for a bit. But when we look at how Trump succeeded in winning the election, he built an extraordinary coalition of disparate parties.
Yeah, and ours was fractured. Ours was fractured. I had so many arguments with my friends about Gaza. Absolutely horrendous what the Democrats have allowed to happen and get away. Let Netanyahu get away with what he's getting away with, and he's besties with Trump. And like, who do you want in there? And then other things about our candidate that they didn't like because of something else. And we just kind of slice. And we really, they were able to build a bigger tent. We were divisive, and it was really, really damaging.
Yeah, and the end result was we had 90 million eligible voters who didn't bother to show up at the.
Yeah, well, a lot of it was conscious. Like, I talked to a lot of young folks, that said, no, I didn't vote. I didn't vote because I didn't like either one, and we got to do a better job bringing them back and listening to their concerns, and figuring out how we're going to get a good candidate in there that they're going to want to support.
Yep. Well, I want to bring my dear friend Michael Nagler into the conversation. Michael, great to have you back with us today, and you'll want to rename yourself when you have a moment. You're showing up as me, and I'm honored.
Well, I don't know. Okay, we'll have to stick with it for the time being, Tom, because I'm so technologically challenged that I don't actually do that. But Tom and I are pretty close, but the same name is a bit much. I wanted to throw in something, and I do apologize because I had difficulties getting on this morning. And you may already have covered this, but I have read, and it was very poignant for me to read, that if Kamala Harris had said, "I will stop sending arms to Israel," she would have gotten elected. People have done the polling, and the sentiment was very, very strong that this horror that's being visited on Gaza is an affront to humanity and an insult to the nation, and not even going to mention what it's done to Judaism. And that it's just, people are just churned up inside with the horror of it. It's just very emotional. And if she said, "I'm not Joe Biden," but she didn't specifically add, "I will stop those arms shipments," and that support on every level for Israel, that she would have gotten elected. And I think that's an important lesson for us to learn, that people are more fed up with war and violence than they seem. than they like to appear. And if we had a real peace candidate, and admittedly, there have been versions of that before which didn't work very well. But I think any kind of successful candidate that had other strengths to rely on that would strongly say, I'm going to bring peace to this world, would elicit votes that are just slumbering there, Tom, in those 90 million people that you mentioned.
Yeah, picking up on that point, Michael, I've seen with the passing of President Carter a number of reports that talk about during his 4 years in office.
Yeah.
He did not, reportedly, he did not send any military folks in to execute leaders or to enact war. He wasn't responsible for the killing of any people directly around the world. And
Yeah.
we often hear as president, it's not possible to do that. But if those reports are accurate, it would appear that in fact it is.
Yeah, this is very much in line with what I was just saying, that if, and a lot of young people are saying, if the Democrats were bolder and were real Democrats, so we had a real choice, they would be surprised at what kind of sentiment would come out. Yeah. I think one of the greatest electoral tragedies in my lifetime, which goes back a while now, was the way that Reagan humiliated Carter at the presidential debates. It was devastating on so many levels. So,
Yeah. And we certainly, not only did he do that during the debates, but after he was elected, he did everything he could to destroy Carter's record as a president. And we've seen Trump doing the same thing to Biden. And I don't expect that that's going to change. And before we started the broadcast, you mentioned in the green room that you were a supporter of President Reagan, and I'd love to, if you'd like to share, your journey, your transition, and how you've arrived at where you have with your political affiliation and beliefs.
Oh, cool. Thanks. I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Army, Vietnam vet, 100% disabled from that war. Turned into be an anti-war activist. Like when the Gulf War happened, he led all the marches, spoke at all the peace rallies. During the intervention in Central America, he spoke at the peace rallies and was really upset with what we were doing in Nicaragua and El Salvador. But before that, we were a military family, and we thought the government, we were taught Fort Lewis, Washington, I remember when I was a kid, we saw the flag go up, you had to pull over and stand out of your side of your car, put your hand on your heart. And that's, so it was pretty militaristic. So it came time to find a place to go to college, and I decided to leave Reno and get east of Sparks, Nevada, and go to Washington, D.C., and was a student at GW. And I got an internship with Senator Paul Laxalt, who was Reagan's best friend. They were both governors at the same time, Nevada, California, and was able to, and then met Reagan a few times, and I was just a kid, but and I didn't really have a political consciousness that much. Then one of the issues that the office worked on was the MX missile. The Air Force wanted to put, again, this giant nuclear weapon system in Nevada. And my grandfather had a ranch in Central Nevada. It's where I spent the most beautiful days of my childhood. It was a working ranch, and I loved it. And that thing was going to be destroyed. That was going to be wiped off the map and so I started looking at that thing, and I thought, oh God, this is really stupid, and I quit. and I came back to Reno, and I volunteered for the group that was fighting it. And they hired me at age 23 to be their executive director. I knew jack about anything. And I did that for 10 years. And then I helped form a social justice coalition of labor, women's, native tribes, environmental groups, LGBT, and ran that for about 25 years. And I do hold the record for getting arrested the most times in Nevada. Uh, uh, and I told Bill that was to help get rid of my karma for supporting and voting for Reagan. And he said, you'll have to get arrested a few more times to get your karma back on that.
Well, back to the conversation we were having before about actions that folks can take and strategies that can be pursued. I love your idea of a big tent and coalition building across shared interests. Are there other things that you've learned from your experience that would be valuable with the current position that we're finding ourselves with regard to the environment?
I think now is a real time to also take some risks, that if you have been doing one thing your whole life, like writing letters, that's really great. What maybe you go and testify at your city council or your legislature. If you've been testifying or at your city council or legislature on things, maybe you organize more people to do that with you. If you've already been doing that, maybe you look at forming broader movements to help you maybe you look at ways to help build that out so it's a lot more robust. I think that, so to try and take it to try and like be as courageous and as bold as possible right now, because again, your courage is going to make me more courageous, and my courage is going to help you. And these are going to be, we have no freaking idea what's going to happen in these next couple of years, and they're counting on us to be afraid. It's like what George Bush, after we had a good chance after 9/11 to bring people together. And George Bush told us to go shopping and to spy on our neighbors and to be very afraid. We can't fall back into that again. We've got to be as bold and courageous as we can. That means different things to different people. And particularly for those of people like me with a lot of privilege, it's going to mean that, I can do a few more things that maybe somebody else who's going to be more targeted won't be able to. And that's totally cool. I understand that. But I think for those of us that have like positional power, social power, economic power, we've got to really figure out the ways that we're going to show up as courageously as possible now. And again, it'll look different for different people. I thought that meant in the first Trump era, for me, I thought that meant getting arrested a lot more. And so I did. And I don't think that's going to be as useful this time around. I don't think that those kinds of symbolic arrests, nonviolent direct action, are going, because that worked during the civil rights movement and anti-war movement when the targets actually had a conscience, and when they were afraid of losing power. Today I'm afraid that it's just going to feed into their narrative. That doesn't say that we should like take those out of our toolkit, but they should be a scalpel, not this broad sledgehammer that I wielded like 4 years ago.
Michael, I suspect you've got a point of view on that.
Well, you are right, Tom. How surprising. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that they have to be part of a spectrum of things that we do. And secondly, we have to know when to use which. And that has often been missing in these mass movements. It's like all you've got is a hammer and you keep on banging it. The other side is much more clever. They shift tactics and suddenly we're irrelevant. And a big dimension of this that I'd like to add, and this is where my Gandhi background comes through, but I've actually been saying this for decades now. Yeah, this is an extreme threat, and we do need to respond to it very courageously, but at the same time, not let it take up 100% of our energy. A big chunk of energy and intelligence has got to be devoted to planning for the future,
Yeah.
building the world that we want.
Yeah.
Because just simply to keep on saying we're against, we're against, we're against. It's reminding me of that one extreme example of this occurred in Peru 30 years ago. There was a rebellious guerrilla group there called the Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path guerrillas. And they demonstrated to the public that they could assassinate people, which they did very effectively, but they never demonstrated that they could govern, that they could build anything. And the people turned against them in due course. So I think it's an immensely powerful thing to build the networks and the institutions that we want as if we were free to do that and just continue to do that. And on that platform, then go into the resistant
Yeah.
action. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Maybe before you got on, Michael, it's a real privilege to talk to you.
Thank you, BK.
Before you got on, I mentioned I'm down here at this Creating Change conference, about 2,500 LGBT people here in Las Vegas. And Trump is going to be across down the road tomorrow. And it's all we can do to get down there and scream and yell and disrupt it. But the conference organizers, and I think they're right on this, although it's really, was that, we are here building for the long haul right now. We are building our relationships. We're building our infrastructure. We don't want to be part of Trump's story. We don't want to be so predictable that we fall right into his trap again. And I think that really speaks to your wisdom, Michael, that you part in.
Yeah.
Well, we've certainly seen that with the Republican Party. They, over the last couple of decades, they have been incapable of saying what they stand for. And, over and over again, very clear about what they're against, but they haven't shown to the American public what they stand for. Yeah. And I'm wondering, go ahead, Michael.
So I just want to quickly come into that. That shows the power we would have if we were to do exactly that. Say what we stand for, and not in abstract terms. We all know we're for justice and love and peace and all of that, but exactly what that would look like and how we intend to try to build it. So I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
I was going to, as part of that strategy, I'm wondering, if I've always found, some of my most powerful experiences in my life have been in nature. And I'm just thinking that, in terms of what can people do, how do we get more people out in nature, both to witness the awe and the beauty of nature, the inspiration of nature, but to also take people to sites where humanity has destroyed nature. In the western part of the U.S., we've got 17,000 abandoned uranium mines and decimated communities where there had been either nuclear waste stored or mining operations where the tailings and the waste material has destroyed the groundwater and the communities. And so, imagining people taking vacations, taking tours of both the degradation and the awe and the beauty of nature as a tactic.
Yeah, one of the things that we did at both Citizen Alert and Plan, Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada, for 40 years was got people on buses and in their cars to do exactly that, led by Western Shoshone and Paiute and Washoe leaders who took us to their homelands to show the destruction that settler colonialism through mining, through military, and Nevada's the most militarized state in the country, to show the devastation, and then to also show the sacred beauty and to really connect people to it. And it had profound impacts on all of us. And so I think that's one way to do it. I think for me, I mean, I hiked a lot, like 2,500 miles in a year. Most of that was solo because, I think I need to start bringing people with me. I think I need to start like saying, hey, I'm going to show you this new trail. Let's get a group of us together. Let's all go out together. I think I need to break out of my need to be like, well, I always love to be alone. I'll always go solo, but I think we need to reach out to people, bring them out there with us,
Yeah. Yeah, my granddaughter's in Las Vegas. I think she
Oh,
should go along with you.
oh, that's great. There's some
Yeah.
great places to get out here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little more seriously, Tom, I wanted to add kind of an infrastructure to what we've been proposing to do, which again, I also completely agree with. In fact, when I was a kid, a long time ago, I used to say that when I'm president, my first act, it wasn't like the current president. I didn't say I'd be a dictator from the first day, but I said I would insist that everybody in this country get out in nature at least one day a year, no matter who they were. You know, bring them down out of the 15th floor of whatever tower they were in and put them in the Adirondacks for one day, then let them go back and vote. I was optimistic about that. But what I want to add now is I think we should do exactly what you're saying, and we should explain at the deepest level possible why this is important and why it works and what capacity it has to change. Because as a former professor, I learned in my teaching career that you have to address people's minds at different levels because we have different levels of being within us. We're mind, body, and spirit at the very least. And so you have to give an explanation of who we are, why it is that we are happier with connection than with separateness. Here's the scientific reasoning for it. And the evidence for that is so abundant today. I mean, it's just extremely easy to do that. And I think that would be a helpful dimension.
Absolutely. I'm like a personal example of that is that, I was in a gym for years and went every morning religiously. And then the pandemic hit and I had to quit. And I discovered that, there's this beautiful path right down the street next to the Truckee River, which flows between Lake Tahoe and Pyramid Lake. And I discovered that I could run there. I could carry little vice grips in my hands to like strengthen my thing. And then I could like slow down. I took some meditation classes and I could like slow down and do some walking meditation while I was doing that. And and then I was reading about the physiological effects of that and what was happening. And it really helped me understand why I was feeling so fresh and so alive after that happened, why I felt so much better after doing that than like being on a treadmill looking at my phone for an hour, listening to people in the background grunt lifting those weights, and but it really, so I do not have to go back to a gym, although this hotel has a gym and I went for the first time yesterday. I kind of missed it, but I really missed the Truckee River, let me tell you.
I wanted to invite Jim back into the conversation, and really, just really appreciate the decipherence you have and the perspective you have on the ground. What you've seen has worked in your decades of activism, and also your insights into what we can be doing moving forward.
Well, thanks so much. My pleasure. And I really, really got a lot out of this conversation. So thank you.
Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you, Tom. Good to see you, Michael. Thank you, B. I want to take up your comments about civil disobedience in relationship to resistance. And in particular, the decision by the organizers of this LGBTQ conference really to stay focused and not to protest Trump. It's interesting that yesterday we had Jody Evans on, one of the co-founders of Code Pink. I imagine she's probably even been arrested more than you. I mean, well over 100 times, sort of at last count. But she made a similar comment that, what Code Pink is focusing in on are the underlying issues of community building that need to be able to endure through this dark night, right? And I want to probe that because I think that's a very interesting insight into the dilemma of resistance and the timing of the resistance. And let me open that up, if I may, in the following way. It was Martin Luther, and you're talking to a guy that's been arrested, not by your standards, only about half a dozen times, but at the Pentagon and at nuclear power plants, and so we should get together for dinner sometime and swap war stories. But I was always struck by Martin Luther King's comment that the purpose of civil disobedience is not to solve the problem. It's to call attention to the problem. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been done with Trump. And so I was struck as someone who flew back to Washington during his first inaugural in 2017, and there was 1 million women on the streets, and we were the enthusiasm and the esprit de corps was just palpable. It was really amazing. This inauguration, there was a little march on the Saturday before the Monday. No news. Attracted not 1 million, but maybe 20 or 30,000 by the police estimates, and not much happened even during the inauguration or post-inauguration in any way. So I'd like to probe it because that leaves me unsettled. Because Trump is starting the mass deportations today. Building community through Code Pink or through LGBTQ is going to take a generation. So in your own mind, as someone who, protested against the MX missile and now may not go across the street to challenge Trump tomorrow, how do you square that circle between the immediacy, the demand for immediacy and response, and the seeming lack of effectiveness of direct action and civil disobedience, which are the immediate responses?
Yeah, no,
I'd love to have, and Michael
dilemma.
and Tom, I'd just love to have all of your comments on this, because this strikes to the heart of what do we do with Trump?
So I don't think people should confuse the fact that there weren't a million people out on the streets this time with the lack of engagement by those of us who oppose Trump. I think it's just taking a different form. On the day of Trump's inauguration, I was at a meeting with undocumented people and allies on how we are going to show up for their community in Reno and how we're going to be able to be accompaniers, advocates, how we're going to work with churches, businesses, schools in order to make sure that their rights are protected. I think that was a hell of a lot more effective than going out and yelling at freaking buildings that day, you know? So anyway, so I just think it's taking different forms. Now there is going to be a time to get out in the streets, no doubt about it. But I think that should come from a place of deliberation, not knee-jerk, kind of thing, because that's where we make mistakes. And that's what they want us to do. That's Trump really wants us to fall into that. And I think we've got to play more offense.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, good
I'll
point.
add,
Good
yeah,
point. Michael.
excellent. Just to add one dimension to that, what it seems like we're doing is playing catch up and letting them take the lead. He does something offensive, we react. He
Right.
does something even more offensive, we react again. And it may feel counterintuitive, but I think to some extent we have to drop the reaction energy and drop back to punt, as it were, and start planning something constructive and positive for the future, which is, as again, it's going to feel like we're giving up. And we have to have the imagination to see that we're building something for the future that'll be much more powerful. And finally, we will be taking the lead. That is what we should aim for. So it's just kind of another way of saying, another way of looking at what you both have just been saying.
Mm.
Yeah, and I would just add that, we know that all politics are local. And whatever's happening in Washington, D.C., the margin in the House is only a couple of seats that the Republicans have. The margin that they have in the Senate is small. The Supreme Court only sees about and takes on about 1% of all cases that happen in federal court across the country. And so we have an opportunity in our individual communities. And I'll just reference last Saturday night on Saturday Night Live, Dave Chappelle did a monologue. And he talked about, he lives in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And he went over to the community that was, being attacked by Vance and Trump, that the Haitians were eating people's cats and dogs. And he went into a local restaurant and he ate there and he supported them.
Mm.
And he said, I don't know what I was eating, but it was very good. And so, we each have that opportunity to, organize in our local communities and to ensure that, half the states in the country are democratic states. And we have an opportunity at the local level to ensure that we have the communities, we have the society that we want.
Mhm. Yeah. And go ahead.
Often what can happen in a case like this is when you're having a vast mass of people who are being abused in some way, in this case, deported, one case can spark people's imagination.
Yeah.
The only
Mm.
problem is it's difficult to plan for that,
Yeah.
but good plan for seizing on it the minute that it happens. Now, I remember when I was in Germany a long time ago, there were some Turkish refugees in a particular city in southern Germany, and the German equivalent of ICE came for them. but they had taken refuge in a church. They're Islamic, of course, but they had taken refuge in a church. And a group of nuns went out and kneeled on the road and just completely blocked the police. They just didn't dare go through. And however depraved and hyper enthusiastic people may be, there's a place where their humanity can be touched. I guess I've just said two different things, but they kind of complement at least. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're very right. That speaks to, Martin Luther King spoke a lot that ultimately everything that they were seeking to do was to quicken the moral conscience of America.
Yeah.
And whether it's civil disobedience or nuns kneeling on the driveway in front of the police cars or whatever it is that quickens the conscience,
Mhm.
that reminds them of their humanity is the right tactic at the right time.
Yeah.
So there's been all kinds of stories out of the Second World War and the various protest movements toward that end. What I'd love to do, B, since you mentioned it, and I know this is from a strategic kind of a political point of view, this is what's up next, and that is the 2026 elections.
Mhm.
Because the majorities are razor thin.
Mhm.
Just the LGBTQ, community will now be on fire in ways that it hasn't been, even though it knew. Now they're going after you.
Mhm.
They're wiping out DEI,
Yeah.
literally by executive order. So all those people now are in a heightened state of awareness about politics in America. And many of them may have been just sort of going along, to get along because they were vulnerable anyway. So there's the possibility now of mobilizing a larger army than before the election.
Mhm.
And so the question I wanted to put to you as an organizer of these things is just speculate. If you were going to organize the resistance that would take the House and maybe the Senate in 2026, what would we need to be thinking about?
No, I think that's great. I think starting now, building, and again, this speaks to not getting out and protesting every damn time Trump does something stupid. This speaks to like having our own plan, our own agenda, our own offensive strategy that is not going to be knocked off by whatever the heck he tries to do. And so it means for me, and what we're doing at Third Act is we're looking at key House districts where Republicans won by narrow majorities this time around, because they're gonna, if history is a guide, they're gonna have a tough time in these midterms, but so we've got to pour all our resources into a couple dozen of these House districts that we can flip. The other thing to look at is the Senate map. That looks a little bit more difficult, just to be honest. And then there's also governor races, like here in Nevada. Our Republican governor is up, and Cook just put it at show. The Cook report just put him at one of the most vulnerable races in the country, which just makes me so happy, because he was the cop. We call him the private security agent for the Las Vegas Strip, because he was like the sheriff of Clark County, and he got arrested on this law and order thing. He hasn't said one word about Trump's pardons of these murderous thugs. Not one word. He will not say anything. Anyway, so I would just love to see him defeated. We got to find a good candidate. Anyway, so looking at those things. The other thing is looking at state legislatures where we can create trifectas. That is, both houses under the same party rule and the governor rule, and where we can flip those So they might have a Republican congressional delegation, but if their state government apparatus can go blue, we've really got to focus on making that happen. There's a couple opportunities for that. Nevada's one of them. And so being really strategic about that targeting, and then doing the political education right now of our base that talks about the importance of these elections, and that and that tries to organize them, and voter engagement right now. We can be out there registering voters every day right now. That was, one of the few seats that changed parties from Republican to Democrat was the California district around Fresno. No, not Fresno. Anyway, it was a kind of a California district, Central California, and people got started there. Our third actors got started there like 18 months before the election, registering voters to get enough people registered to build up enough mass. And then they started doing canvassing early on, like 8 months before the election, door to door, and then helped with get out the vote. And then on election day, the Republican was actually ahead by just a handful of votes. But then they did the thing called ballot curing, where they made sure that all the Democratic votes were being counted, and the Democrat ended up winning by a handful of votes, like 15 votes or some small amount like that. Anyway, it just shows the idea about starting early and then and amassing a lot of volunteers and then persevering throughout is going to be super important.
Yeah. Wow, you really put in a lot of thinking. I'm impressed. Very well done. Well done. It's within reach. The point you're making is it's within reach.
Absolutely. You bet it is. Yeah. Yeah. And wouldn't that be sweet if he took a shellacking,
Yeah. Well, Michael.
I would just throw in that in that educational component. I think you talked about getting started ahead of time. It's not too soon to be thinking about big structural changes that need to happen in order to democratize the US. And people are now talking about the Electoral College, being willing to see it go. And that's one of several really kind of deep structure dimensions that I'd like to see us thinking about. Personally, I think, this may not make sense immediately, but when you think about it, it does. We somehow have to change advertising. Commercial advertising degrades the human image and makes us vulnerable to a person who glares at us and tells us we're worthless and we should be scared and vote for him. No names, please. So this is what I like about this is what sometimes is called a stealth approach, that the opponent will not see the connection and therefore will not react against it until it's too late. That was the beauty of the Charkha, the spinning campaign that Gandhi led, and the salt campaign for that matter, same thing. The British said, you may even have seen it in the Gandhi movie, where let them make their damn salt. The next thing you know, the British Raj is collapsing.
Yeah. Good. Well, listen, we have to start bringing this week to a close, Tom, and I'm just wondering how best to do it. We've been contemplating strategies of resistance, and maybe starting with you, B, and then Michael and Tom. Why don't you each just summarize in just a minute or two what, for you, in our current situation facing Trump 47, what's your counsel to people of goodwill?
Well, for me, the first thing is don't let him steal your joy. Don't let him, and don't let these fraught, dangerous times pull you down the rabbit hole of despair. That is their hope. That is their, if to the extent they even have hope, that is the hope that they have. And to do things in community that are going to open your heart, that are going to like help you to show up as fully as possible. And then again, like challenge ourselves to show up as fully as we can right now. And with as much, I want to say love, of course, but I also want to say strategic acumen. These are times for rigor, for sobriety. I use the term sobriety a lot because when Trump got elected in 2016, one of the things I did is I went out and started smoking pot again. And I was smoking a boatload of weed again. And it really, and now I'm not doing that. I'm trying to show up as clear-headed as possible, Anyway, not that I'm like here saying, oh, stop smoking weed if anybody does. It's whatever. But for me, I got to show up as clear-headed and as open-hearted as I possibly can and work with other people, yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I wrote it down. Don't let him steal your joy.
Yeah.
I think that is so fundamental, B. We've got to still be living our joie de vivre, whatever the circumstances. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Michael.
What he said. No, I would just add one thing, and that is in situations like this, when panic sets in and despair sets in, we tend to get completely target focused on the present. And of course, we need to do some of that, but let's remember always to think about the future, where we're going from here. For one thing, that lifts the depression a little bit. Elise Boulding was of blessed memory. She was very good on this tactic of visioning. If you don't vision what you want, you'll have no energy to get there. And she often brought in the case of what they did in Sri Lanka, which was in the case of extreme threat, they created a 100-year plan. What do we want this island to look like 100 years from now? And then they stepped it down. Okay, 75, 50, 25. What do we need to do today to be on that ski slope that'll shoot us off into the joy of the future?
Beautiful. Thank you. Tom.
Yeah, I think coming into this week and working over the last couple of months to put this week together, there were some unexpected events and unexpected content that came out of the week for me. Certainly one was Dr. Bernice King's address at the Ebenezer Baptist Church on Monday. Was not something I was expecting. And also the bishop's comments at the National Cathedral, the two women stepping forward and demonstrating and inviting us to embrace mercy, to see two powerful women stepping forward in the way that they did with the messages. That wasn't something that was on my radar coming into this week. To have Jody yesterday and B today remind us of joy was not something that I was anticipating coming out of the week. And then I think the third surprise for me was not bringing AI into this conversation. And seeing with President Trump's actions on Monday to remove the Biden executive order around guardrails for AI development. And so, if I think about the administration and the potential threat to humanity, that's the one concern that I'm leaving this week with, is that we didn't anticipate the threat of AI in this new administration. So those are my thoughts. I mean, it's been a wonderful week, and I'm just delighted that we've had the panel and the conversations we've had, and I'm really looking forward to next week, the other side of the coin of forgiveness, and where, how do we forgive?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. What I'm drawing from the week as well, just to make a comment of my own, I think was been distilled in these last comments, bringing the program to a close. I think we're entering into a time where it's not so much what you do, it's who you are. That is important for all of us to take seriously. And that requires a depth of self-awareness. For example, to be strong enough not to let what's happening rob us of our joy. And not to rob us of our instinct for generosity and caring for our fellow human beings and for the environment. And I think, Michael, your last comment to me is also extremely important. You talked about, a 100-year plan, but at the heart of that, as I was experiencing what you were saying, you're talking about the power of intent. That it's easy to be demoralized and lose our grounding, get caught up in negative emotions, and come to believe that an alternative future is impossible. And I'm coming to feel more and more deeply, Tom, as a result of these 5 days, that I need, particularly since I'm in Washington, D.C., right? And Trump is like a mile and a half away at the White House. For me, I'm realizing that I really have to deepen my practice and deepen my scrutiny of when these moods of depression and anxiety and concern are starting to overwhelm me, in anxiety spasms and depression spasms. And then I realize that my intention is compromised. So I want to really bring those two together. I'm bringing them together is my beingness right now and my capacity to maintain intent toward creating a better future. And if I was to add one other thing, I think I don't remember. I think maybe it was you, B, saying, or maybe it was Bill McKibben, we're not individuals anymore. We're community. We're community. We're nodes in a community as our context and frame of reference for our basic essential identity. I love that. I love that the Buddha's the Sangha. And so thank you all, Tom, Michael. This has been a brilliant week, perfectly timed as usual. And tomorrow, to go into this whole question, everybody, what does forgiveness mean in a time of duress? It's completely different than forgiveness in a time of normalcy, because it challenges different aspects of this continuum between vice and virtue. And so really looking forward to that 5-day program, Tom. And so that'll bring us to a close, everyone. You're welcome to the after chat to join our presenters. You'll see the link of the after chat in the chat box. You received it in our Zoom reminders for today. Have a good weekend. Enjoy life in the midst of it all. It's a great time to be alive.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.